Mark Wilson directs The Calling Witch, and this is a horror thriller. I'm going to be honest with you, it's probably more thriller than it is horror, despite some of the imagery on the promotional art, posters, DVD box, things like that. Let me give you an idea of the story here. It primarily focuses on two siblings, an adult older sister and a younger brother. And not long before this story starts, their mother has committed suicide. And the mother was an author and then some type of artist. And this family kind of lived on the edge of the forest and were somewhat the kind of town pariahs. And we learn that the father has to go away on business, so it's up to the kind of the sister now to look after the younger brother. And they seem to be menaced by someone, something coming from this dark forest. Could it be the local town youths causing trouble? Could it be an escaped person from an asylum? Could it be the mystical calling witch, or could it be something else entirely? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. Now, this is going to be a movie where I think it's marketed in a certain way, and it's not actually true of what the actual movie is like. But should we judge it on the movie that we wanted it to be, or should we judge it on the movie that it is? So I think we should judge it on the movie that it is, rather than the kind of our expectations about what we wanted from it. So with that in mind, let's talk about what I think works in this movie's favour. The strength of this movie is it's character based. And as such, I think the characters are well portrayed by the actors. I think the actors all do a good job here of giving empathetic, likeable performances, believable performances, characters you kind of understand their motivations. And I do think for example, the way these characters are written, like our older sister, you know, she feels like shackled to have to look after the younger brother, for example, whilst the father is away at work and she kind of wants to go and have her own life, etc. The brother's kind of feeling like a bit of a burden because of this. So I do think there's some decent character work here. And obviously when you have a movie which is primarily a character-driven movie, you know, it's important to have decently written characters that are well acted. And I think this movie does do that. The movie has something to say about parents. Without kind of going into too much detail here, there's a kind of a parental message here about good parents versus bad parents, for example. And what parents might do, what they might not do. So that's an interesting kind of little bit of commentary about the role of the parents, I would say, in this movie. The film does have a creepy element, and although I'll be honest and say this movie really isn't a horror, for a time it kind of plays a little bit like a horror / kind of home invasion sort of style movie. And the movie does try to keep you guessing to a point, at least, in the movie about what's actually kind of going on. I actually guessed the twist before it was revealed. So it's not really that hard to kind of work out, to be honest with you. But there is a twist, and you know it is, you know, it's fairly interesting, albeit I think it's a relatively obvious one. That definitely puts it in a certain frame rather than another, shall we say? So it's kind of a well acted movie. It has some interesting ideas. It is a slower paced movie. If you're not really a fan of slow drama types, this won't be for you. But if you do like a kind of more character based movie, a more dialogue driven movie, more about relationships with one another, with a kind of a veneer of horror thriller, then this may be one to watch. You know, it's well made in regards to its production and cinematography, and like I say, it has almost this window dressing of horror, so it kind of at times feels like you are watching a horror movie. But then it doesn't, you know, it's not really a horror movie when when it's all sort of said and done. Which again, let me kind of now transition to what doesn't work. I mean, this isn't really going to be a criticism of how I'm viewing the movie, but it is worth mentioning I do think this film is a little deliberately misrepresenting itself. So it's positioning itself as a horror movie. It really isn't. Like I said, it has a few sort of sequences that are horror-like, if you know what I mean, but when you are watching the film as a whole and you understand the context of it all, it really isn't a horror movie. You know, it is a thriller drama, to be honest. So that's not going to appeal. I think maybe the movie should have been a little bit more honest about what it's trying to be in regards to a movie. I understand it's trying to bury the lead in regards to its what is really kind of going on, but I do think you risk kind of annoying people that are expecting a certain type of movie because of that. But what doesn't work, the movie is outside of that sort of misdirect. I do think the movie is possibly a little bit slow for its own good, especially when you think the audience are probably expecting to see something, but it's kind of like a relatively slow family drama, to be honest, with a few sorts of eerie scenes, a few sort of scenes in the dark with a little bit of the unknown going on, but it's kind of like, you know, not exactly a thriller minute, shall we say. It's not necessarily, you know, it's not trying to be like that. You know, this isn't a movie that tries and fails to be an exciting movie. It's trying to have this slow, deliberate pace. But I do think maybe there was, you know, it's possibly a little bit too slow for some. I do think, to be honest with you, the horror aesthetic is a little misjudged at times, because there's some logic issues here about biology and things, and how people sustain wounds and stuff, and how things have happened that the movie's kind of a little vague on, and you're thinking, well, how is this? You know, how has a person not been affected in a certain way, and how has a person got the drop on them? Things like this. There's a few sort of questions that I think the movie just ignores because it wants to kind of like have the movie go in a sort of certain direction. I have to say, I think character motivations here, particularly towards the end of the movie, are really murky, and I don't know if I was completely buying it, to be honest. So the movie has this sort of twist, and without kind of revealing anything here, you know, I don't know if I completely kind of bought it. There was too many kind of loose ends for me. You know, the movie's obviously leading up to this point where it's the big reveal about what's kind of going on, and it's like, okay, but there's certain things that just weren't addressed. And again, I can't really say anything really because it will spoil the whole twist, so I'm not going to say it. But when you start to think about it logically, I just don't know if it really made that much sense, to be honest with you. This is a movie as well where I just felt it ends in a certain way, and again, there's unanswered questions to me. So I have to say, I think this movie is a little unsatisfying, to be honest, even with the movie that it is, rather than the movie that it's trying to be. So even if we look at it through the lens of a thriller drama rather than a horror, I do not think the script is quite there. The pacing is possibly a little bit too slow, and I think the movie is deliberately being kind of misrepresenting itself to kind of like have the aesthetic of a horror when it really isn't. And even, you know, even when you're first watching the movie, it kind of feels like it's more of a horror, and it really isn't. So I do think the movie is a little, you know, unashamedly telling a few like porky pies, to be honest. So how to judge this movie based on what it is? I mean, I think the movie is a fair drama. It is a fair sort of thriller, without being especially thrilling because it's a little bit too slow and non-eventful in a way. But nonetheless, it's an interesting character study, I guess. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. It's not going to be for horror fans, but if you do want more of a, you know, a drama, a thriller with more of the window dressing of a horror, then you may want to check it out. 5 out of 10. What were your thoughts? Leave me comments and I'll look forward to you next time.